Let's take you back to April 22nd, 1915, near a Belgian town called Ypres. On this day, the very nature of war was about to change forever. We're going to dive into a terrifying turning point in World War I, when a strange, silent weapon was unleashed on a massive scale for the first time, and left a legacy that honestly haunts us to this day. So, try to picture the scene. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the Western Front. Soldiers are hunkered down in their trenches, stuck in that grim, muddy stalemate of the war. And then suddenly, they see it. A strange, greenish-yellow cloud, about 5 miles wide, just drifting slowly toward them on the breeze. It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The first soldiers to be hit were French colonial troops. And when that cloud rolled over them, the effect was immediate and just horrific. Absolute panic erupted. You had men choking, blinded, collapsing in total agony. The Allied line didn't just break, it completely dissolved in terror. So what was this horrifying new weapon? It was chlorine gas, a terrifyingly simple and incredibly cruel chemical agent. You see, because it's heavier than air, it sinks right down into the trenches where the soldiers were hiding. And when they breathed it in, it reacted with the moisture in their lungs and formed hydrochloric acid. It literally burned them from the inside out. And you have to understand, the scale of this first attack was absolutely staggering. German specialist troops opened almost 6,000 cylinders, releasing 168 tons of gas. This wasn't some small-scale experiment. No, this was a deliberate, massive deployment designed to completely shatter the enemy line. And it worked perfectly. But this all begs the question, right? What could possibly lead to this moment? Why would the German High Command resort to such a horrifying weapon? Well, the answer really lies in the deep, grinding frustration of the year before. This slide really just nails the huge gap between what everyone thought was going to happen and what actually did. See, back in 1914, everybody expected a fast, mobile war. Germany had their Schlieffen Plan, France had Plan 17. Both were all about quick, decisive movement. But modern firepower, machine guns, heavy artillery, it just blew those plans to pieces. The war of movement became a war of entrenchment. And this deadlock, it happened really fast. After the first big offensives failed with insane casualties, the German advance was finally stopped at the Marne. Then, you had the race to the sea, where each side just kept trying to get around the other, but all they did was dig more and more trenches, until the front lines stretched unbroken all the way from Switzerland to the coast. So by 1915, both sides were just stuck, mired in the mud. Charging across no man's land was basically suicide. So how do you break through these incredibly fortified lines? Well, for the Germans, poison gas started to look like the answer. It was their chemical key, they hoped, to finally unlock the stalemate. Okay, so let's get back to April 22nd. The green cloud has done its gruesome work, the Allied line is shattered. What happens next is a story of absolute chaos, but also of incredible, desperate courage. 4 miles. I want you to just think about that number for a second. That was the size of the completely undefended gap that was torn in the Allied line. An entire division had just vanished. In theory, German troops could have marched straight through, attacked the entire Allied line from the side, and maybe even captured the city of Ypres itself. The door was wide open. So this is the big question, right? If the weapon was so unbelievably successful, why wasn't this an overwhelming, decisive German victory right then and there? Well, believe it or not, the answer is that the Germans themselves were completely stunned by how well the gas worked. They were actually cautious, advancing slowly behind the cloud, and crucially, they hadn't committed enough backup troops to really take advantage of the massive hole they just created. And that hesitation, it gave the Allies a vital, razor-thin window of opportunity. And in that tiny window, Allied soldiers came up with this truly desperate, almost unbelievable defense. They had no gas masks, nothing. So they were advised that the ammonia in urine could help neutralize the chlorine. Soldiers were ordered to urinate on handkerchiefs, on socks, whatever they had, and press them to their faces. It was a crude, horrifying, yet partially effective measure born from pure survival instinct. And right into this chaos, into this hellscape, stepped the 1st Canadian Division. For many of them, this was their first major battle of the war. They were ordered to fill the breach left by the fleeing troops, and they launched a series of ferocious, incredibly costly counterattacks, most famously at a place called Kitchener's Wood. fighting through the night to halt the German advance and, somehow, stabilize the line. Now, while the Canadians and the British somehow managed to hold on, the genie was well and truly out of the bottle. Ypres didn't end the stalemate, but what it did do was unleash a terrifying new dimension of industrial warfare. The element of surprise? Yeah, that was a one-time deal. It was gone forever. But this was just the beginning. Ypres kicked off this frantic chemical arms race, with both sides scrambling to develop even more lethal gases, like phosgene and mustard gas, and at the same time, the technology to deliver them and defend against them. And you can see on this timeline just how incredibly fast things changed. I mean, we're talking about going from those improvised, urine-soaked rags in April to the first proper gas masks being issued just a few months later in July. By early 1916, even more advanced helmets were being issued to counter newer, deadlier gases. The technology was evolving at a breakneck pace. And the sheer scale of this new arms race was just staggering. Just look at these numbers. By the end of the war, Germany had produced nearly 70,000 tons of poison gas. But the Allies weren't far behind. This was no longer some fringe weapon. It was a core part of the industrial war machine. The bottom line is, after Ypres, chemical warfare wasn't an experiment anymore. It was a standard, horrifying feature of the First World War. For every soldier on the front, the fear of a silent, drifting cloud was now a constant part of life and of death. So when the dust finally settled on this month-long battle, what was the real outcome, and what is its lasting, lingering shadow? The brutal math of the battle really tells a stark story. For all the horror and all the innovation, Germany failed to get that strategic breakthrough they were looking for. The Allies held on to Ypres, but the front line was pushed back, and the cost was just immense. Over 100,000 Allied casualties and 35,000 German, all in just over a month of fighting.
But numbers on a chart? They can feel a bit abstract, can't they? This quote from Lance Sergeant Elmer Cotton, this gets to the real heart of it. Drowning only on dry land. That phrase just powerfully captures the unique, personal terror that this new weapon inflicted on its victims.
And it wasn't just the soldiers. Beyond the staggering human cost, there was the cultural devastation. The historic medieval city of Ypres, which the Allies fought so hard to defend, was systematically shelled into absolute rubble, becoming this haunting symbol of the war's capacity for total destruction. And this brings us to our final, lingering thought. The green cloud at Ypres opened a Pandora's box of chemical warfare. And despite international treaties and widespread condemnation, that box has never been fully closed, leaving us with a question that echoes all the way from the fields of Flanders to the conflicts of our own time.